Good morning and welcome to the Newport Beach Chamber of Commerce and the UCI Paul Merage School of Business 2025 Economic Forecast. Yeah, there we go. Thank you for leading that, Richard Riesman. We've got an exciting program for you today as we look into our economic crystal ball to produce an economic forecast for 2025. It's been a year since we last convened here at the Balboa Bay Resort, and we seem to be at an inflection point. Last October, many economists were still considering the possibility of a 2024 recession. However, the Fed seems to have engineered a soft landing of the economy. Chris may disagree with me a little later, we'll see. Yeah, we often disagree. Now I lost my point. Last October, however, the Fed seems, GDP has increased every quarter for the past year, achieving a 3% growth in the most recent quarter. And at the same time, unemployment in the United States, while slightly ticking up in the past few months, has remained close to historically low levels. The stock markets all performed admirably, with the S&P and the NASDAQ indexes posting a year-over-year increase of 35%. Just looking good for your 401k plans. And the Dow is not far behind at 26%. Up until a couple of weeks ago, the Fed kept rates level, closely watching the rate of inflation drop from 3.2% last October to 2.5% currently, which finally led them to pop out with a half-point decrease in the federal funds rate. Perhaps the brightest spot is the drop in the 30-year mortgage rates from just under 8% a year ago to just over 6% this week, while home prices have continued on a slightly upward trend. And finally, and I know Chris doesn't like me talking about this, the bastion of investment, Bitcoin, is up 120% year over year. So hats off to the Bitcoin owners. However, there is a however. With an election only 5 weeks away and some economists still predicting the possibility of a recession in 2025, uncertainty still hangs over the economy. And therefore, we're not here to dwell so much on the past as to figure out how we got here and what the future holds. And to that regard, a little later, we're going to once again bring a true expert, Chris Schwartz. He's the professor of finance at UCI Paul Merage School of Business, and he's also the faculty director at the Todd and Lisa Halbrook Center for Investment and Wealth Management. So we'll be hearing from Chris a little bit later after lunch. So please feel free to continue eating while I take a moment to recognize some of the VIPs joining us for the forecast today. So with us is Newport Beach Mayor Pro Tem Joe Stapleton, City Councilwoman Robin Grant, former Mayor Keith Curry, former Council Member Jeff Herdman, former Orange County Supervisor Lisa Bartlett. I think he's here, Huntington Beach Council Member Tony Strickland, right over there. Of course, our City Manager Grace Leung, our former City Manager Homer Bludow. Homer had a couple knees replaced, but he's looking pretty spry these days. I think he's doing okay. Glad you can make it. City Attorney Aaron Harp. Fire Chief Jeff Boyles. Both Assistant City Managers are here, Simone Jurgis and Tara Finnegan. Our Library Services Director, Rebecca Lightfoot. She's got a little project going on in her front yard over there. Saw they put the steel up for the new Civic Auditorium. Planning Commissioners John Langford and Mark Rosine are with us. Harbor Commissioner Marie Marston. The President and CEO of Newport Beach & Company, our Visitor Bureau, Gary Sherwin. The President of the Newport Beach Association of Realtors, Kim Foreman. And last but not least, the publisher and CEO of the Orange County Business Journal, Richard Riesman. Right there. So as expected, an event like this can only occur with significant support of some very special sponsors. So please let me present our 2025 forecast sponsors. We have ACI Jet. Got a whole table of them here somewhere. Pacific Life. I think Tennyson should be here with us today. Tennyson Oiler. Shop Off Realty and Investments. Shop Off. Got a big project just approved in Huntington Beach for the tank farm. Congratulations to you on that achievement. And of course, Spinnaker Investment Group. Our silver sponsors are Bridgeford Trust Company, Umpqua Bank, and JSX. And of course, our supporting sponsors, UCI Paul Merage School of Business, and the Todd and Lisa Halbrook Center for Investment and Wealth Management. How about a big round of applause for Balboa Bay Resort for hosting us here today? And of course, I want to thank my employer, the Newport Beach Chamber of Commerce, Jeff Parker in the back, Annette and Shauna out in front doing registration. Thank you for your assistance in helping with this event. So we also offered this up to other chambers here in the county if they wanted to co-partner with us on the event, and we had, how many? 9 of them this year. I'm just going to quickly run through them. You can clap at the very end. But Yorba Linda Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, San Clemente Chamber, Laguna Niguel, Laguna Beach, Anaheim, South Coast Metro Alliance, the Tustin Chamber, and the Santa Ana Chambers are all co-partners with us on the event today. Thank you all for participating. Some of their CEOs and chairmen are here with us. I also want to thank our table sponsors and Leadership Circle members here. These companies support the Chamber at the highest level and help underwrite many of our programs and activities. Platinum members should be on the screen: ACI Jet, Balboa Bay Resort, the Balboa Fun Zone, City of Hope, Davies Locker, Orange County 5th District Supervisor Katrina Foley, Hoag Hospital, Newport Beach and Company, the Pendry Newport Beach, Simple Green, our boat parade sponsor, Southern California Edison, and Vea Newport Beach, a Marriott Resort and Spa. Those are all our platinum members. And I'll list our gold members quickly too. VK Suites, UCI and UCI Health, the Newport Beach Association of Realtors, the Newport Beach Police Association, West Coast Arborists, and Yamava Resort and Casino. And of course, all of our 30 or so silver level Leadership Circle members, they should appear on your screen as well, and they're in your program. So please continue enjoying lunch. We'll take a little break here for a little while, and then we'll come back with Chris Schwartz a little later in the afternoon. Thank you. So I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. I had a lot of good comments about who enjoyed their lunch. Raise your hand. Everybody, come on, raise your hand. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, our featured speaker today is Chris Schwartz. He's with the Center for Investment and Wealth Management, and he's been the cornerstone for our forecast for the last probably 6 or 7 years, I think, at least. He even helped us through the pandemic. We were resuming the forecast at that time. So Chris is going to make his presentation. At the end, we're going to entertain questions from the audience. We've got a little more time this year because we only have one speaker, so hopefully we'll have if you got a good question, write it down so you don't forget, and we'll try and cover them at the end. So I'll just read his bio here. I shortened it this year. I mean, it's probably longer than my arm. He's done so much, but we want to get right to the good stuff. So Christopher Schwartz is a professor of finance at UC Irvine's Paul Merage School of Business, as well as the faculty director for the Todd and Lisa Halbrook Center for Investment and Wealth Management. During his time at UCI, he's been published in all the leading academic and practitioner finance journals. His research has also been cited by the New York Times, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Financial Times. Prior to arriving at UCI, Christopher received his PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, during which he was also a visiting doctoral fellow at Yale University's International Center of Finance. He received his BS from Babson College in Wellesley, Mass., and he also has 2 young kids that keep him very, very busy. So with that, please welcome Chris Schwartz. Ooh, he's spry.
Good to see you, man. All right. So, since you want to respond to Steve, how was the lunch? I've never been heckled from off the stage, Steve. So that was the first time for me that you're beginning there. So anyway, it's great to be back. So usually I have 2 speakers, but I'm such a diva, no one will work with me apparently. So it's just me this year. But of course, I'm happy to be here and hopefully give you guys some good information this year. All right, so let's get right into it. Last year up on stage here, the whole world was thinking about JPAL, right? So people are complaining rates were too high. People are complaining rates are too low. Everyone thought of JPAL as kind of Zach Galifianakis in The Hangover, like who let the dogs out? Like, we don't like this guy. Can we get rid of him? Can we get somebody else that we do like? All right, but while everybody else thought that JPAL was kind of Zach Galifianakis, JPAL was really asking the entire world, are you watching closely? All right? So he's kind of the magician here. By the way, if you haven't seen The Prestige, great movie. All right? And of course, now everyone's happy. The market's going crazy. Interest rates are coming down. Everyone thinks we're going to have a soft landing. All right? And so it's kind of like at the Gladiator, ooh, we're mesmerized by the amazingness of you, Jay. All right? Things are great. All right? And of course, now we look at JPAL, and we think he looks like this Zach Galifianakis, at the blackjack table. All right, which is great. But, of course, we have to be a little bit careful, all right, that we don't celebrate a little too soon, like our friend Leon Letts back in the Super Bowl. I'm sorry, Cowboys fans. I know it's America's team. I know no one in SoCal gives a shit about football, right? Because if you go to any football game in Southern California, you're definitely have more people for the other team, right? That hasn't changed. Hasn't been a game in a while. All right, so anyway, maybe we care now. All right, so some general thoughts here, all right? So, the economy is just kind of trucking along, all right? It's a little bit slower generally every year, all right? We probably are one shock away from a recession, but no one's been really good at predicting what that shock is. So every single year, as I'll show you, people think they're going to have some recession, something's going to happen. It doesn't generally happen, all right? It's really difficult to do, all right? I think that the economy is kind of sort of overplaying the AI hand, which I'm going to talk about. All right, so I'm going to sound really old because I'm going to make fun of new technology, but I'm going to try to sound young by making fun of it with the same technology. All right, so I'm going to try not to date myself too much. And I think current stock valuations that I'm going to show you are very high. Right, but that doesn't mean that there's a crash. I think people just have to have more reasonable expectations because as Steve noted, it's been a really good year for markets. As I've been trying to tell some people as I've spoken to you out there, if you are not happy with how the markets and the economy are right now, you're going to be very unhappy in the future because it really doesn't get any better than what we have right now, right? We have good GDP growth, low unemployment. Pretty much you could have invested anything this year would have been good, and so it's only downside from here. All right, so let's be honest, right? I know, we have the Pacific Life Vest program, and I remember some kid asked what an actuarial table is, and I put in my information at the time. It said, you're 41, you have 40 years left to live. It's all downhill from here, right? All right, so every year I start with the Fed forecast of what's going to happen with GDP, right? So again, Fed has lots of data, best economists. So look what's going on for 2024. They predicted about, somewhere about 1.5% for the year. You can see that we're on pace for about 2.3% GDP growth. So this is real GDP growth. So this is how much more output we have from the economy, how many cars and planes and everything else we're making. All right, you can see their forecast for next year is we're going to be about 2%, right? So I'd say 2% is a fairly typical year, and that's what they're expecting next year. All right, and so really every single year, as I'll show you in a moment, people have been predicting some kind of recession or something's going to happen to the economy, but really the economy is like John McClane from the Die Hard series. It's like that bleeping Energizer bunny, right? It just will not quit. No matter how much you try to kill it, it's just not going to go away, right? Because in 2023, we were supposed to have a recession, and admittedly, when I was here in 2022, I told you there's probably going to be a recession in 2023. I learned my lesson. I didn't say last year there'd be a recession, and there hasn't been one yet. But of course, we had Recession Watch 2024 with a whole guide here of what you're supposed to do when the recession comes. And people are saying there's like a 50% chance that we're going to have a recession this year coming up, and I think that's probably way too high. All right? Why? Just everything is good. Right? And the economy is like a huge freight train, right? You just don't stop a huge freight train unless you have some kind of big shock, right? So unemployment, has it creeped up? Sure. But we're at 4%, right? It's not like unemployment's got up to 6% or 7%. Probably the number we had was a little too hot, right? We were probably past what economists call full employment. We're probably at a much more sustainable level now, right? Lots of people are working. So it's not like people are hiding on the sidelines and not working. So believe it or not, we even have 6 million more people employed now than we did before the COVID. right? So it's not like, oh, people always think we have a lot of people sitting around. I mention this every year. I think that people think that everyone's surfing at Huntington Beach and not working. It's just not true, all right? You can see that we got lots of people working. And if you look at this, which is the percentage of working age population people that are trying to get a job, that's in blue, or the people that actually are employed, that's in orange, you can see that those are the highest they've essentially ever been, right? So if you think about this economy, we have everybody who wants a job basically can get a job, and almost everybody's participating, right? It really doesn't get that much better from an employment perspective, right? So the bench here is empty, everybody has a job, right? There's lots of other data that you can look at. So just the one thing I want to note is, some people are, statistics lie, right? So we all know statistics lie. So the orange line here is the participation rate that the Bureau of Labor Statistics will tell you. And so they base that on everyone over the age of 18. What's the only age group expanding in the United States right now? Seniors, over 65, right? So the reason that the orange line is not going up is because essentially we're getting old, all right? And unless you think people should work their entire lives, basically the blue line is better. That takes out everyone over the age of 65. So just know when you read that every month and people like participation is really low, it's because they're expecting Warren Buffett still at 92 to have like a McDonald's job, all right? And given how much you can make working at McDonald's here in California, it might be worth it for him, all right? If you go down to the La Jolla McDonald's, he might be there. He might ask you, do you have a code? All right, so maybe it's a good place to work. All right, so there's not a lot of signs things are cooling, right? So this is every Thursday, so I didn't know the number this morning. I didn't have a chance to take a look. All right, but this is the number of initial jobless claims, and then you have, that's in blue, it's a little more choppy, and then you have continuing claims, that's in orange. You can see that we had this little scare where everybody's worried like the end of the world was happening, but you can see it hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, it started to go down again, right? So the labor market looks good. Then we have something called the JOLTS report, which I'll get to in a moment, but this is just one thing that is kind of slowing down. So this is the number of jobs on average created each month by different years, so 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. And you can see it's gone down a lot, but of course, if there's nobody left to give a job to, then you can't have a lot of job growth, right? So again, like I said, things are slowing down, but it's a natural progression just because we all have jobs, right? JOLTS, this is the number of people that are quitting and the number of jobs available. So number of jobs is in orange. You can see it's come down a lot, but you can see it's still the higher that it's ever been prior to COVID. So it's still a good number. People aren't quitting as much. They don't feel quite as good about their jobs as they did before, but it's still not an unusual number. In other words, the labor market's really, really good. All right, really, really good. All right, and so I think probably everybody in the room feels like the labor market's really, really good. All right, and what do people do when they have jobs? They spend every cent, all right? I always joke in here, there's nothing better than spending money that we're good at, right? This is our true talent here in the United States, spending money. All right, so this is our personal savings rate, all right? So we had a spike during COVID where you didn't have to wear pants, all right? I remember one time I had a student that said they hadn't dry cleaned any pants in 3 weeks, and I just hope their Zoom camera didn't fall down. All right, so you can see here we had a moment where it's really high, but we're down to 5% again, right? We're not very good at saving money in the US. We're very good at spending money and just hoping more money comes later. All right, so personal saving is very good. And if you look at consumer expenditure, so this is the amount of consumer spending going up every year, you can see we're around 5%. We've hit kind of the steady state at 5% per year, which you'll note is higher than it was pre-COVID. Right, so pre-COVID, after you see the drop, by the way, I truncated the bars here a little bit just to make the graph easier to see around COVID. There's some big swings, but you can see for the 10 years prior to COVID, we didn't really average the number that we have now, right? So we're doing a really good job spending money. By the way, 70% of our economy is spending money, right? So it's really hard to think that if people have jobs and we always spend our money and that's 70% of our economy, we're going to have a really slowing economy unless there's some shock to create people or cause people to lose their jobs, all right? All right. Now, there's a lot of negative people. How many people know someone who's negative? All right, everybody. All right, so like, for example, Steve earlier was negative about me. Heckling goes both ways, buddy. Remember, I go second. All right? Yeah, he doesn't know what I did to behind him in the pictures we took earlier. All right. So everyone thinks we're like Bud. All right, like Bud Fox. All right? I'm tapped out, man. American Express has a hitman. Do you know how many times I've heard about credit card? How many people are credit card? Oh, my credit card debt's out of control. And they showed this graph. Oh my God, the world is ending. This is the end of the world. This is the total amount of credit card debt outstanding. Let me fix this graph for you. I'm going to index this by the size of the economy. Problem solved, right? Shocker, the economy is getting bigger, people have more credit card debt. It's like saying your income goes from 10,000 to 100,000 and you're spending more on your credit card. Is that a problem? Of course not. You're making 10 times more money. All right, so we have another thing that was canceled, our credit card problem. All right, so credit card problem, not an issue. All right, people are like, okay, but you know, the Middle East. All right, and I'm not going to get into geopolitics right now. Things are entertaining there in a bad way. All right, and so people are worried about oil. But oil has gone nowhere. This is like the last 20 years of oil. Oil's right in the middle where it always is. And why is oil not really affected anymore? Because who makes the most oil now? We do. We've been kicking ass for 200 years. As Bill Murray said, we're 10-1. I think we might be like 11-2 now, but that's okay. All right, we're like 10-1, depending on you count. So we make the most oil, so we're less impacted by these things going on in the Middle East. And we don't even use that much oil. How many people have an electric car? All right, I want to thank you for when we have a brownout next summer. All right, thank you for your electric car. Okay, but what about the election, right? This is going to be the end of the world. All right, we got Kamala here. I had to change my picture a few months ago. We got Kamala here. Don't worry, Republicans. I have some bad news for you on the next slide. So enjoy the slide. Enjoy the joke. I'm an equal, so if you'll note here, my tie has blue and red on it, all right? So I planned ahead, all right? So of course, this is coming out. How many more days to the election? Like 32? All right, 32 days, all right? So for the hundreds in attendance and the millions watching around the world, let's get ready to rumble! See, I'm ready. I'm ready. All right, I have no idea who's going to win the election. If anybody in this room says they have an idea who's going to win the election, they're lying. All right, we have no idea. Right? There's literally like probably 700,000 people in this country that's going to decide the election, and we have nothing in common with any of them. All right? I mean that truly. Like someone watches the debate and say, oh, I feel like my candidate's going to win. And I'm like, do you think any of these 700,000 people that matter think like you do? They don't. All right? So who do you want to win? All right, so I'm going to show you some statistics, and I'm not making a political statement. I'm showing you economic data. All right, so if we go down here for GDP growth since the World War II, GDP growth has been better under a Democratic president. Job growth has been better under a Democratic president. Inflation has been lower with a Democratic president. Deficits have been lower with a Democratic president. And the S&P return is 3 times higher with a Democratic president. So if you're a Republican, and Trump loses, at least you have this to fall back on, that things that might be better. If you're a Democrat and Trump wins, I ain't got shit for you, sorry, all right? All right, things are just downhill from there. All right, I will caveat this graph. I don't know really that the president has a lot to do, right? Cycles are very long. Like if you think about Joe Biden, and I'm not picking on Joe Biden or supporting Donald Trump, this is just a statement. You know, Trump left in the middle of COVID effects. So of course, it's probably easiest for Biden to hit the bar. But this is over 90 years, right? So the kind of those things should average out over time, right? So I have no idea. This is not causality. This is kind of just some data. And so I just thought I would throw it out there. All right, why is government spending important? Why do I care about who wins? I don't really think it matters, but why is government spending important? Because remember, the first rule of government spending is why buy one when you can buy 2 for twice the price, all right? Great contact line. I love that one. All right, and the reason I'm interested is because government spending has really been high, you know, the last decade, right? It's been growing way faster than GDP's been growing. All right, so I took out COVID here, right? There's a lot of like crazy lines during COVID stimulus. I want to get rid of that just seeing the graph. But before COVID, we had about 5 to 6% growth in government spending. Government spending now is growing about 6% per year. All right, so again, government spending is like 20% of our economy. So if consumers are spending 5% more per year and the government's expanding at 6% per year, again, it's really hard to think about how we're going to have a recession, right? So again, there has to be some kind of shock or something to cause a recession. So unless there's something here that really forces the governments to stop spending money, I think this run rate's probably going to continue. I think both candidates have talked about lots of things that are going to raise the deficit that would be fiscal expansion for us, so I don't think that this is going to change anytime soon. All right, so let's get to the man of the hour, the magician, all right? So I think probably at some talk recently I showed you an inverted yield curve almost always leads to a recession, like it almost has a 100% success rate of forecasting. So Jay's ability to invert the yield curve and not have a recession could be the greatest magic trick that we've ever seen before, all right? we've never really seen a Fed have a soft landing, all right? And so that's why I think people are so surprised if we actually end up with a soft landing, all right? Because what happened was, this is a graph of all the Fed raises since World War II, all right? This last cycle is in black. You can see that it went up very, very quickly, right? So it went up very quickly. They raised rates. That was the fastest they ever raised rates. They kind of hit this plateau, and now they started going down, all right? So if you look just in comparison, the last time they started raising rates is in yellow, right? So you can see there's this huge contrast to what happened last time they raised rates in the cycle, and this time they raised rates, and it's incredibly different. Like I said, everyone was criticizing them about either raising them too much or too little, or leaving them there too high or too long and going to cause a recession, but certainly those things didn't end up happening, right? Or haven't happened yet anyway, right? The forecast is for cuts to keep happening, right? So the forecast this year coming up is by the end of this next year, we're going to have Fed funds at 3%. It's about 5% now, so that's 8 cuts. They would call that 8 Fed cuts, 25 basis points at a time. So obviously, if you can imagine rates are, say, 5% now, 3%, you can imagine mortgage rates would come down a lot, right? So this is very, again, supportive of what's going to happen in the economy if these things actually happen, right? The only thing I don't believe, so this is market forecast for Fed funds, I don't really think that we'll always have positive real rates. So if inflation is 2%, we keep rates at 3%, that means real rates are 1%. I think probably that terminal rate there is probably a bit too high. But generally speaking, next year we should see rates come down a bit. All right, and I think there's plenty of room for them to do this. I think, honestly, they probably could cut pretty much as rapidly as they brought rates up. All right, so I showed this last year. Again, it's a very confusing graph, but it's not actually that confusing. So raw CPI is on the left. That's how it gets reported every month. If you remember, during COVID, we had oil prices recover from a negative price, right? We had everyone buying used cars because no one wanted to die in the subway. All right, and so once you subtract it off, kind of real CPI was on what I call a permanent CPI was on the right. So we had that big burst of inflation, all right, but you can see the transportation, that wonkiness is all fixed, all right, and now, but you can see we're stuck at 3%. So it seems like inflation is persistently sticky, right? So maybe the Fed doesn't have a lot of room to cut. Maybe they're just going to cut a couple of times and stay there. However, I think that's probably overstating what inflation actually is, right? It's overstating, right? So this is shelter. I probably had the same graph last year. All right, so you can see, just let's go before COVID. You can see there's 2 different indices here, the blue and the orange. So one's Zillow and one's apartment list. And you can see the number from CPI, the gray line's in the middle, right? It's exactly what you expect, right? So what rents are doing year over year, on average, is going to show up in the data. So you can see it right there. Of course, then rents went crazy because during COVID, everybody realized they didn't like their spouse or their friend, and they got their own place. All right, so rents went way up because there's demand. Hey, I'm just being honest here. Too soon? Too real? Yeah, maybe too real. All right, and then things came crashing down, and now you can see shelter is still way above in CPI, the indices. You expect it kind of be in between those, right? Even if it was down on the blue line, you think the orange line's too low. You expect it to be steady state in between the 2 lines, and it's not. And so, if you read any apartment, rent information, rents aren't really going up very much, but CPI seems to say they're going up a lot. All right, and so if we kind of adjust CPI for this weird shelter component, all right? So again, I have the same regular CPI on the left, I have the contribution of shelter in the middle, and then I have CPI minus shelter on the right. You can see that CPI is well under 2% once you kind of get rid of this weird shelter component that seems too high. In fact, it's even close to 1%. Right? So eventually shelter will converge, and at that point, CPI or inflation is very low, all right, and so we'll see things probably that give the Fed a lot of room to cut coming up. All right, so what's the risk? All right, so it's not all champagne and strawberries. All right, so there's one other time the Fed kind of cut rates. All right, so the Fed kind of cut rates. All right, and you can see this was back in 1998. So I know lots of people in the room remember 1998. All right, so in 1998, we had basically the LTCM crisis. That was a hedge fund that blew up because they shorted all these bonds, and some fun stuff was happening in Russia, and we had this big financial crisis and this big panic in the market, kind of sort of like we had this summer. Right? And so the Fed started cutting rates. So this is Fed funds. You can see we came out of the 1990-91 recession. They raised rates. It was kind of steady state. They got worried about things in 1998. They started cutting rates because they thought they needed to stimulate the economy. And then, of course, everybody knows what happens in 1999. What happened in 1999? Prince had a very famous song. No, it didn't come out in 1999. All right, so this was the NASDAQ, right? So you can see basically right after they cut rates in 1998, it went up 250% in the next 18 months and proceeded to crash after that. All right, so I think actually the fear that economists should have is not that the Fed's going to cause a recession. I think it's actually the opposite, which is the Fed's going to overstimulate the economy too soon and essentially lead to some asset bubbles. And I'm going to show you some examples of some asset bubbles that are probably being caused out there in the world right now. So that's my personal worries about economists. I'm probably the only economist that's actually worried about that. But I'm actually worried they might cut too fast, too soon, and overstimulate the economy, right? And again, it's going to be hard to tell that for a year or two. I'm actually less worried that we're going to have some kind of recession. All right, so just to give you a summary, and we're going to talk about finance. Just again, I think the economy is going to grow a decent amount this year unless there's some kind of weird shock. All right, we're just slowing down naturally. All right, so you can imagine, like, as you get to the end of the career and you're just a glide path into retirement, we're just glide pathing in because we're just running out of people to employ. All right, so slowing down isn't a sign of recession, it's just showing a sign of a mature economy. All right, the Fed's kind of softened us up. So, if I'm going to use a boxing analogy, they've given us a bunch of body blows. All right, so that gives us probably some more risk to the downside, potentially. If there were a shock, something like a COVID-2 happened this year, of course, that would be a problem. It also kind of limits our upside risk, right? So I can't imagine the economy is going to grow at 5%, right? I think it's much more likely we have a downside event than an upside event. But it's really, really hard for me to think about a natural shock, right? Government spending is not going to go anywhere. People have jobs. The Fed's cutting rates. It's kind of hard to imagine that things are going to fall apart, right? Unless, again, there's something that you can't predict. And we're going to get to that a little bit later about things that we might not be able to predict. All right. How's everybody doing so far? Happy news? Yeah? Do you want me to say some bad stuff? No? Okay, I'll just keep saying good stuff. I feel like I need to say something crazy. Like, we're going to have like 800% GDP growth, and then like, I'll go viral. So far, I'm boring, all right? So financial markets this year were like the red dragon. So when I've had a bad day, which, do you have 2 little kids? Might be every day. I love my kids, all right? By the way, I finished my slides at 4 in the morning this morning. I love my kids. All right. So when I'm sad, I watch Rush Hour 2. Chris Tucker kills me in that movie. All right. But in any case, it's like the red dragon, right? Everybody's a winner. So this is from Rush Hour 2. They make a casino. Everyone's a winner so they can launder money. And so really, this year is one of these, as Steve mentioned, is a tremendous year for financial markets. Again, literally, you couldn't miss, stocks. I mean, the S&P is up 37%. All right. Long-term bonds, 20%. Gold is up, like 46%. Even international stocks, I think many of you see me say terrible things about international stocks. All right, those were up 28%. Of course, Steve already stole my punchline that Bitcoin was up 114%. Yeah, I don't know what to think about that. But anyway, Bitcoin is up 114%. So anyway, I mean, things are tremendous over the last year. And so it's really hard to argue with financial markets. But of course, I hope everybody knows this is not normal. Right? This is a really, really good year for equities, a really, really good year for bonds, a really, really good year probably for Bitcoin, and a really, really good year for international stocks, right? Also note that, you probably want one of these not to be like the others, right? Because when one of them goes down, guess what all of them are going to do? Yeah, they're probably going to go down, right? Unfortunately, I can't tell you my mom has wanted to sell stock yet. So if my mom wants to sell stock, I'll tell you. I'll put it on LinkedIn or something so you guys all know to buy. Probably more importantly, when my mom asked me, I called her this morning, by the way, just to ask her what she thought about the stock market, just to make sure she didn't want to buy more. Because if she wanted to buy more, I would tell you all to sell all of it now. She did not make that call this morning. She just told me I was her 3rd favorite child. That was... Yeah, that was it. All right. So this year was a fun year, right? So this is a graph from everyone was talking up Japanese stocks this year, right? So, probably you didn't hear about this as much as I do. Everyone's buying it. Warren Buffett's buying Japanese stocks, blah, 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 right? And so this was the chart, and people are telling this is the best market ever. You should put your money in this market. It's amazing, right? So this graph ends on like mid-July, all right? And then 10 days later, this graph looked like this. Oh, if you didn't mention, yeah, they kind of went down 32% in like 10 days. It looked like that. And of course, then everyone's saying that's the worst market ever, right? And of course, people are thinking, wait, but how to go from the best market to the worst market in 10 days? And you're kind of like, well, kind of a lot of things happened in 10 days. I mean, it kind of went down 32% in 10 days, right? And so you have this market that's very volatile. And actually, by July, things were pretty boring, right? Nobody's talking about their, crashes or COVID or whatever, or pretty much on election or whatever. And I was thinking to myself as an economist, right? Thank God, man, things are getting kind of boring. I need something exciting to talk about. I'm going to come here and tell you guys things are good and blah, blah, blah. And I need something exciting to happen. By the way, Anchorman 2 car chase scene, top notch. Top notch. All right. The truth was Japan wasn't that very, very good anyway. All right? And so I'm just going to dwell on this point for one moment because I want you guys to think about this. Japan, I called it the monetary miracle. I actually had a blog post called Monetary Miracle from end of last year about Japanese stocks actually were not doing that well because Japan was destroying the yen, right? So it went from like 130 yen a dollar to 160 yen a dollar over the time the market was going up. And so really it was just a monetary illusion, right? Where they were essentially printing money to lower the value of their currency, and they were using that money to buy stocks, by the way. Japan's central bank can buy stocks and pushing up the stock market. And after you put things in US dollar terms, you would still rather been an S&P 500, right? In other words, you can't use monetary policy to create growth, right? You need growth so economies do well, so that companies have earnings so that they become more valuable, right? That's the only way the story works. You can't take Japan, whose population is doing what, by the way? It's going down a lot. And you can't go ahead and create more jobs and expand the economy, et cetera. You only can create some kind of illusion using monetary policy, and that was going on anyway. So people were very excited about Japan without ever doing the math that they should just invest in the S&P 500 anyway. All right, I'm going to show you another example of this in a few minutes. Probably some of you can imagine. I'll give you a hint. It's another 5-letter Asian country. I'm going to talk about. It starts with C. I think that narrows it down. But I learned geography in the US, and we all know we suck at geography. So, all right. And this is what I really mean. So this is the forest from the trees. All right, so this is the Japanese stock market, which peaked in 1998, and everyone was excited because after 35 years, it finally hit the same number it had 35 years ago. All right, and you can see that did not last very long. All right, so you can see here, by the way, Japanese working age population peaked in 1990. All right, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. All right, so again, you can't really create growth. Like financial assets basically end up looking like the economy. You can't just create financial assets being worth something by basically printing a lot of money, right? You got to actually put in the hard work. All right, so I got more bad news. So it can't be all champagne and strawberries, right? All right, stocks are super expensive. All right, so this is backward-looking PE ratio. This is by Case-Shiller, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on stock valuation. All right, so you might know what he's talking about. So you can see here the red line is where we are now. There's not many times we were above the red line. All right, so the only 2 times we're above the red line was in 1999 and 2021. Was 2022 a good year for stocks? Down 30%. All right, was 2000, 2001, 2002 a good time for stocks? Not really. All right, so again, I'm not saying we're going to crash. I'm just telling you things are not cheap. I can pull up lots of things that show things are not cheap. So this is my fun versus boring ratio. This is NASDAQ versus the NYSE stock. So NASDAQ index value divided by NYSE. All right, this summer, actually, right before things kind of got a little bit crazy, it passed 1. So you'll note here it used to be 0.2, 20%, actually passed 100%, and then things kind of came down a little bit, so we're like 95% now. But again, things are kind of looking, to quote Beyonce, they're looking a little bubblicious when you start looking at things like the AI stuff. That was a song, right? Oh, no, I missed that one. I can't say that up on stage. Are we recording? We're recording? Oh, I can't say it. Never mind. All right? The dean's not here, so I have a little more leeway than usual. All right, so anyway, so this is relative to bonds, right? So this is bond yields, how much you get for buying a 10-year bond versus how much earnings yield you get for buying stocks. This would be like earnings divided by price, all right? And so you can see here that the yield you get on a bond is higher than the earnings yield you get on stocks, and of course, bonds are less risky than stocks. So stocks are not cheap. You'd probably relatively rather own bonds. All right, I can keep going. This is the Warren Buffett indicator. This is total value of all stocks in the United States divided by the size of the economy, which is also at an all-time high. All right, so again, not cheap. You guys have seen a pattern here, right? Yeah, see, it got quiet now. Less excitement, right? Things are not cheap. All right, this is why Warren Buffett has a lot of cash. He's having a hard time finding things that he should buy. All right, and then of course I could keep going on other things. You have ChatGPT, and then you have GLP. What's GLP? Yeah, it's the weight loss drug, right? So they kind of go together. So this is price to sales ratio. This is not price to earnings ratio. This is how much you pay for every dollar of sales, right? So you can see here if you buy SoundHound, which is some AI company, which I believe is it must be like an artificial dog or something. It's not. It's okay. I know what it is. So you pay $37 for $1 of sales. This is not earnings, it's sales, right? NVIDIA, $30 for $1 of sales. Right? And these aren't even lagged. This is based on last 4 quarters, right? So this is like up to date. This is not like a year old. Eli Lilly, a drug company, you're paying $25 for $1 of sales. All right, and I could go down the list here. I have Tesla there because you're paying $8 for every dollar of sales at Tesla at a company whose deliveries are going down, whose sales are going down, and their earnings are going down. That's smart. All right? And then I put Sun Microsystems there from the year 2000, right, where they had a price to sales ratio of 10. All right, so I'm going to put this in here because I'm going to read you a quote. This is an actual quote from the CEO of Sun Microsystems. Are you ready for this one? Here's the quote. At 10 times revenues, to give you a 10-year payback, I have to pay you 100% of revenues for 10 straight years in dividends. That assumes I have $0 of cost of goods sold. I have 0 expenses. That assumes I pay no taxes, which is very hard. You pay no taxes, which is kind of illegal. That assumes 0 R&D for the next 10 years. Now, would any of you like to buy my stock at $64? Do you realize how ridiculous those basic assumptions are? You don't need any transparency. You don't need any footnotes. What were you thinking? So I want you to think about that. This is the guy that runs the company calling you a moron for buying his stock. By the way, he had a huge equity ownership, so he has an incentive for you to buy his stock. And so I'll just go back so you guys can look at, these aren't 10 times revenue, these are like 30 times revenue. All right, so I'm not saying these aren't real companies. This is no, the NVIDIA is a real company, right? But at some point, valuation matters, right? And so I worry about when I see valuations like this. It's like when Rivian was at $130 billion market cap and it had sold nothing, all right? Rivian's a great company. They're based in Irvine. I have nothing but good things to say about them, all right? But at no point were they worth $130 billion, all right? So just be careful when you start getting into this AI hype. All right. So another one of my big concerns is, why do we have recessions, right? We have recessions because people get too excited about something, we overinvest in it, eventually people have to write down that investment, and of course that's a drag because all those people lose their job, et cetera. All right, and you can see AI investments going on. Google says they're going to spend $100 billion in the AI investment, where they admit that they're probably overinvesting, all right? But it's like that famous celebrity that says he goes to church on Sunday even though he doesn't believe in God, because it's a small cost to pay in case he's wrong, all right? So they say, well, $100 billion is a small price to pay in case this AI thing really takes off. All right, and TSMC executives, this was the best. Sam Altman at ChatGPT went over there, OpenAI, and told them he wanted like 36 fabs for $7 trillion. And they literally laughed him out of the room. Like, they actually called him a podcast bro, right? Because his ask was so ridiculous on what he wanted. And I finally figured out what was wrong, right? Because this was the picture that they had of him, all right? And I noticed it's eerily similar to this picture. I think they just took it after the smoke cleared, all right? But my point here is you kind of start to worry about some kind of overinvestment in AI. And so I'm going to sound really old now, and that's okay, all right? I don't mind sounding old. You know, I used to walk 3 miles uphill and 3 feet of snow both ways to school, all right? I remember when you used to have to pedal to make a bike go. Do you guys remember that? All right? So ChatGPT, by the way, for everything that's happened, it came out 2 years ago. Now, 2 years ago is not very long, is it? All right, think about you're introducing a new product that's revolutionizing the world. How long do you think it would take for someone to copy you? Right? Think about the iPhone, right? That came out in 2007. The first Android phones came out in 2010, and they sucked, right? So I just Googled best LLM models, and it said September 2024 had the 21 best models. So there's 21 best models, right? You got everything here from ChatGPT to Falcon to everything else, Gronk and everything else that's created. And so I'd love you to fill in the blank, which is barrier to entry, not very high, so value is probably pretty low, right? If it doesn't cost you very much to get in the industry, then what's your pricing power? You don't have any pricing power. I can use Google for free. I can have Copilot memorize everything on my computer so I can be turned into the government later, all right? I have, everything going on here, right? It can't be very high. And then people are investing like these billions of dollars, and we're putting on nuclear power plants. Now, by the way, I lived near 3 Mile Island when they had the meltdown, so if you're wondering what's wrong with me, that probably explains it, all right? But it's hard to think of these things. And then I look at the use cases, right? So this is Apple Intelligence, which everyone's excited about. By the way, I hope you enjoy your new phone that doesn't have Apple Intelligence, because it's coming out soon, all right? So it's going to allow you to summarize emails, articles, and other texts. And I was looking at this list of things, and I was thinking to myself, so I went to ChatGPT because I had some questions. So I go to ChatGPT, I go, what is the subject line of an email for? Summary of content. Okay, so I need Apple Intelligence to tell me what an email is about because someone doesn't know what the hell the subject line is for, right? Oh, well, hold on. So I had journalism class. Anybody learning about journalism when they were in school? Like how journalists write articles? No one's raising their hand because everyone thinks I'm going to pick on them soon. I'm not going to pick on you, all right? So my mom would tell you I have many talents, but journalism and writing and reading is not one of them. So I also went to ChatGPT. I wrote, what is the first paragraph of a news article for? And it's to provide essential information and summarize the main point. So why do I have to destroy the power grid to have an LLM summarize something that's already summarized for me? In any case, I don't think a lot of these things have many use cases, right? They're cool, right? Many of you maybe use these all the time, all right? But really, I don't think they're going to replace many of us, right? And in fact, there's an MIT professor who's estimated, who's an AI specialist and loves AI and only thinks it has the possibility of replacing 5% of all jobs, right? So you can imagine, and by the way, we have to be careful. I'm talking about like the computer LLMs. I'm not about robotics and everything else here, right? So I do worry that people are a little bit overamped about AI and the things it can do, all right? And it does some really cool hallucinations, and I can make you guys look like you're doing anything in a photo, all right? So if you post a photo on LinkedIn, I'm going to AI the shit out of that, all right? We're going to have some fun with that, but I don't know how really useful it is, all right? But don't worry. If there's an AI crash, you don't have to worry because there's always a solution for that. And of course, this is China's solution. We're just going to give a lot of stimulus to the economy. By the way, I'm sorry if I'm swearing a little much. I can't swear at home anymore. I said a choice word when someone cut me off driving the other day, and I'm still paying the price for that. So I have to swear now. But anyway, you can just have a huge stimulus. And of course, you can see here what happened to the Chinese stock market. It was down 12% for the year. All of a sudden, now it's up 8%. All right, so again, you have Japan that went down 30% in 10 days. Now you have China, which is up 20% in 10 days because they announced some huge stimulus. And of course, the problem in China, what's China's real problem? What's their real bubble? Real estate, boom, problem solved. So everyone's running out now and buying real estate again and pushing the price back up, right? So is this actually going to lead to growth for China? What's happening to China's population? Going down. It's inevitable. All right, they're just delaying the inevitable. In fact, it's been 17 years now since the Shanghai stock market hit an all-time high. Right? It's been 17 years. And do you know what Homer Simpson did in 17 years? He was born, and he had a really good beer with a fake ID. For that, he was named Brian McGee. All right, so 17 years is a long time, right? So you have these monetary miracles that short-term bumps aren't going to really last. All right, last couple of things here, and I don't know how I'm doing on time. I told Steve I'd be about 40 minutes. I'm going to be about 40 minutes. All right, so people waiting for real estate to get cheap again, housing to get cheap, they're probably doing this right about now. All right? Right? It's a long-term problem. It's going to take a long time to get fixed. The good news is, as mentioned, mortgage rates went from 7, 8% down to 6. So you can see things have got a little bit more affordable. But just to put that in perspective, this is the same affordability that we had during the peak of the housing bubble. Right? So that is still not all that affordable. Right? So housing is still pretty crazy. All right, still pretty crazy. All right, so economy's chugging along. I think eventually we'll have some shock that cause a recession. I have no idea what that shock is. I'm not going to pretend to you I know what it is. All right, I think asset valuations are really pushed here. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have a crash. I just think the good year we had last year, I'd be really surprised if we replicate that this year. And to me, it feels a lot like 2019. Right? So if you heard me speak in 2019 back at the Irvine Chamber, I did the Irvine Chamber back in 2019. That was a long time ago, it seems like now. Things were very the same where things felt a little bit complacent. Right? People think, okay, nothing can possibly go wrong. And, I kind of told you I think it's hard for things to go wrong. And so I want to tell you a little story. You guys ready for a story? All right, you want to use my imagination, your imagination? So I'm going to pretend, like I'm reading one of those children's books to my kids. All right, so what's a black swan? All right, so let me give you an example of a black swan. All right, so imagine you get born a little chick. Pretty cute, right? A little chick. All right, and you're a smart chick. And you're thinking to yourself, what will happen to me today? Right, so you're just born today and you're trying to make a prediction. You got your own little AI engine going on in there. I know my kids do. So somehow my oldest son, he can predict what type of company bus it is from the front, even though I can't still do it. I don't know how he does it. Like I thought I figured out, I'm like, oh, that's a first student bus. He's like, no, Dad, that's American Transportation. It was American Transportation. I have no idea how he does it. Okay? So you're going to go through day one, right? What happens to day one? You get fed, you go pecking around the yard. All right, so day two, you make a prediction. Okay, well, my only data is I got fed and went pecking around the yard, but you don't have a lot of data, so you have pretty low confidence what's going to happen, but you get fed and you go pecking around the yard. All right, so the next day you're going to make the same prediction, same thing's going to happen. You still don't have a lot of confidence because you don't have a lot of data. All right, a few more days go by, same kind of things happen, so you're feeling a little bit more confident that you know what's going on. All right, this keeps on going for a number of days. By day 9, okay, every day I'm getting fed. I go pecking around the yard, I'm certain about what's going to happen, and then day 9 rolls around, and you're a chicken McNugget. So that's a black swan. Right? A black swan is an event that's not in your data set, that you can't predict, right? It's something you've never seen before, never thought about before, right? And it's the black swans that are the things that get you in trouble. Not necessarily the event itself, but the fact you got complacent and you weren't prepared because something happened that you didn't think would happen, right? And so I don't point this out because I think things are really negative. Just to point out, here's, are your predictions controlling for the probability of a black swan? Quote, I rely on existing data, historical patterns, and established models. Black swan events by their nature are unpredictable, so it's impossible for any predictive model to directly control for them. Right? So these are things that no one can predict. All right? And I just got lucky that year because 3 months later, COVID happened. And I never would have predicted COVID. It just so happened it was the timing, and you need to be prepared. So my point here is just don't get complacent. This is the time where things have gone really well for everybody, and you kind of forget about financial planning or forget about controlling for downside risk. So I'd encourage you to check things out, at least look at what's going on in your financial and economic and company world, and make sure if something does happen like COVID again, that you make it through. And I see you here next year. All right, so that's all I got. So if you got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
We have a question over here.
All right.
Hi, so in your analysis, I didn't hear you talk much about the government debt and the interest payments that we're required to pay on that is becoming so much more than it's ever been in our history of the country. So how just our overall budget is just becoming debt maintenance and how that's going to affect the economy differently than what we have now.
Yeah. So I think our government debt is big because we're a big country. We're not any worse than Japan or some of these other countries that have a lot of government debt. I don't really worry about it that much. No country has ever successfully paid off their national debt. We won't be the first. I don't think it's particularly binding, but I would say 5 or 10 years from now, I think I'd probably start worrying if we don't find a way to get our deficit down a little bit. But at the moment, I don't really worry too much about it. Other questions? I don't know who's running around with the mic. Jeff is running around with the mic. If you have a question, raise your hand. And Jeff, oh, here we go.
You mentioned Japan and China and their declining population. U.S. you mentioned also in that regard, but you didn't have it as a negative consequence later on.
Yeah, so actually here, so I'm just stepping over because it's hard actually to hear the mic not being by the speaker. You know, the US actually, our working age population is pretty steady. It's not because we're having more kids, it's because of immigration. So, you know, I think in the past I've talked about our demographics are a little bit challenging. I think relatively speaking, they're not as bad as these other countries, and I don't think they're forecast to become quite as bad. But, you know, I do think that we probably had to, you know, have some lower expectations about growth going forward, just because, you know, if we're not expanding the number of people. But I also think people are retiring a little bit later. You can still get more participation. I think it's, you know, if you look at China, I think their expectation is 75 years, they're going to go from 1.3 billion to 500 million people, right? It's hard to even think about that, right? That kind of population decline. I mean, you can only think about how many houses you have to bulldoze to keep demand and supply together. So they have a real challenge, and you know, I kind of related to at UC, they didn't make anyone put money in the pension for 20 years because they thought it was overfunded, and then all of a sudden it was like incredibly underfunded, and that's just the one-child policy for China. They did the same thing, right? Too many people, and then now they're begging people to have more kids.
And if you have a question, do me a favor, raise your hand now so that way I can make my way over to you.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. Do you have enough data to go ahead and predict for 2026, or is that too early to tell?
I joked last year that the only people worse than economists at predicting things are weather people. So it's hard. It's kind of like the one-day forecast is pretty good, and the 5-day forecast now is actually not that bad. I mean, again, I think things are just going to kind of keep moving along until something crazy happens. And you know, I don't see, like, I don't think Fed policy is super restrictive right now. Again, I think the economy's got a lot of momentum, so it's hard for me to say. You know, again, I don't see, like I said, I'm actually more concerned about overheating the economy in 2026 than I am from a recession in 2026. But again, I'll just be excited if I show up next year and I got most things right. I think I did pretty good last year, but we'll see for next year.
Yeah, Chris, you said you didn't want to predict a shock,
Yes.
but what are the options? Is the Middle East a shock?
Oh man, this is football. You know, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say probably in a way that I could say it better. I think they've been blowing each other up for like 60 years now. I mean, we had, what did we have? We had Libya when I was a kid in the 80s. Yeah, we had the Lebanon War in 2006 or something like that. We had the 5 or 6 day or 7 day war or whatever it was a long time ago. You know, and I'm not trying to minimize those things. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to speak as an economist, especially, you know, I know it's a Jewish holiday today. But, you know, I think for us, we don't export a lot. So I'm just going to think purely as an economist. We don't export a lot from them, and we don't rely on their oil that much anymore. So it's hard to imagine they're the shock. When I think about shocks, like, I mean, if China invaded Taiwan, that would be a huge problem. You know, that would be a big shock. If there's like a huge bunch of investment banks that are sitting on commercial real estate we don't know about that all of a sudden went bankrupt, that would be a huge shock to the system. You know, so you need, or something that just ruins consumer confidence, right? You know, another bout of inflation, or, you know, something that you need something that's probably hard to think about what exactly would be. But certainly you're going to have some kind of shock to like global politics, like a Taiwan war. You're going to have something that shocks consumer confidence. I mean, I know what will happen. I don't know what's going to cause it to happen, if that makes any sense, right? You need something to get people to stop spending, or you need something to get the government to start cutting jobs, right? Those are the only two ways you really impact the economy. And so, you know, I'm not sure what's going, like I said, I can think of like AI. There's too much invested in AI. I don't think AI is going to take away that many jobs. So really, I think probably right now, if I were to think about a negative shock, it'd probably be something in commercial real estate or some kind of really big geopolitical event that we don't know about. Like, for example, if Russia used a nuclear bomb in the, you know, Ukraine war, that would be a big shock, right? And that would probably have a lot of confidence killing for consumers, right? People are going to be worried if they see an A-bomb go off. So those are all pleasant things to talk about.
my cardio for today.
Yeah, Jeff's getting a good workout. So please, just if you could alternate the size of the room when you ask questions.
That concludes our Q&A session, Chris.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. Can you talk a little bit more about the commercial real estate market? I know there's a little over $1 trillion in debt maturing soon, and obviously with rates at elevated levels, that could mean, a lot of properties going under.
Yeah.
But could be opportunities to go in there and scoop them, all cash at low valuations potentially. So can you see what that looks like?
Sure. So I think I can speak generally. I think it's hard for something that people see coming to be a problem. So if you think about like the real estate bubble in 2007, almost no one saw that coming, and so it was a big shock and people weren't prepared. I think banks and the Fed and everybody else is very aware that there's a commercial real estate credit problem. In terms of investment opportunities, I think whenever you can buy something, it's Warren Buffett, right? Whenever you can go in and buy something, when everybody is forced to sell, whether it be stocks, bonds, real estate, anything, usually that works out well for you, right? So I'd imagine if you wait it was funny, someone's like, oh, should I buy this commercial real estate building? I'm like, why don't you just wait them to go into bankruptcy and buy the bonds on 10 cents on the dollar and take over the property? So I think there'll probably be some good deals there for sure. When things come crashing down. On the other hand, I don't know, you go to a lot of malls, a lot of places, I don't know they have much of a future. So unless you can convert it into housing or something else we need, I don't know if you can get it super cheap, then maybe you don't need a lot of upside, but again, for things like office space, I think it's going to come back. I think people are finally going back to, I actually didn't put Amazon's making everyone go back to work. I was going to talk about that, didn't want to go too long. But certainly I think retail space is going to be a tough market for a long time. So, all right, maybe we'll do 2 more, and then I think Jeff's panting.
I pant all the time, Chris. It's okay.
I know.
You mentioned AI.
Yeah.
Is Gen AI going to be one of the key drivers of the economy?
Probably not. I think Gen AI, so how many people have used ChatGPT or any generative AI? So I think it does some good things, right? So, if I write a paragraph about something, I can throw it in there and I can proofread for it, but, I don't know if it's any better than what I used before. People say it writes code and it's great. I think really for you to get the most out of a ChatGPT type tool, you have to be an expert in the thing you're trying to use it for, right? Like, I can use it for some of the things I do, but if I didn't know what it's supposed to do or what the output's supposed to be, it really doesn't do anything for me. And so I think, again, I think that's why the job replacement is pretty low. Like, I don't know how many jobs it could fully replace, right? Because, ultimately it gives you a lot of bad information. Just to give you an example, I was at Columbia last year, I put in my investments final, I got a 24 out of 100 on it, right? And I'm pretty sure I can write in English. So it would have been by far the worst performing student in my class. And that was version 4, right? So, and it's not creative. Right? I mean, it's just basically a little bit better way to do Google. Like, I actually use ChatGPT for Google now because Google sucks. I don't know if anybody think Google sucks, but I mean, it used to be you could actually get a search result on Google that would tell you something within the first 3 pages, and now it's just a bunch of ads for crap I don't want. So I do use it for that, but I don't think it's this, until you get something like the Terminator type of level that's really, kind of human, and I don't mean that from killing people, you know what I mean, from like really thinking like a human. People are like, oh, you can teach it how to write like you are. Well, why don't I just write instead? I mean, so anyway, maybe I'm just old. I'm probably just old. But anyway, I just don't think it's going to replace that many jobs. So I think it can help you if you know how to use it some, but I don't think I think these use cases Apple came up with are complete marketing BS because they're behind. That's my personal opinion. And I have an iPhone, for the record.
So reading between the lines a little bit, it sounds like you don't think the Fed needs to cut rates anymore. Building upon that, what is your opinion about inflation? Because it's been a very long time since most generations have experienced it. Do you think that inflation can be quite sticky from a psychological standpoint, that especially being a consumer-based country, that we may have struggle to get away from?
I think probably you have... So I think you have a segment of the population that's really struggling still with the level of inflation that we had, right? So wages did not keep up with inflation. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, I think those people are still struggling. I was at South Coast the other day. People there are definitely not struggling. I was shocked at In-N-Out. In-N-Out prices have gone up a lot. this year, but of course we were paying workers, if you have a married couple of 2 people that work in In-N-Out full-time, you make $110,000 a year now. And that's not counting benefits, right? So it's going to cost you a lot to go to get In-N-Out Burger now. But I don't really, I think there are, the segment of the population that's hurting, I think they're thinking about price level versus change in price now. I don't know about any of you, but I don't really worry about inflation anymore. But it might take a couple of years, just for maybe wages to catch up. So, all right, so I think we're going to call it there. I think we're pretty close to the end of time. So thank you all for your questions. Thanks again for coming. Steve? Always a pleasure, man. Good to see you, man.
Another great job as usual. How about another big round of applause for Chris Schwartz? So thank you all for coming. I know a bunch of you filtered out. I'm glad you stayed till the end to hear some of his more insightful answers to some of those questions. If you're not a member of the Newport Beach Chamber of Commerce, you should be. We'll see you at our next event. The Newport Chamber Honors in this room, November 1st, Citizen of the Year and Business Person of the Year. Thank you all for coming.